the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
We might have to start talking about them as World Series favorites.
We'll see, Jon Tayler. We'll talk a little bit more about the Braves and Phillies in a second, but of the four teams that were eliminated this week, Jon Tayler, who was the biggest surprise wild card exit for you?
I think it's the Rays. I don't think anyone is surprised that the Marlins are out. Like I said, the weakest team in the field. By Pythagorean record, they were a 77-win team. Really just kind of snuck in thanks to the Cubs collapsing. Similarly, the Brewers, once Brandon Woodruff went down, I think that turned that series pretty much into a 50-50 shot, and Milwaukee's offense was always going to be the potential problem for them, and as you saw, it was. And Toronto, you talk to Blue Jays fans, or you see what they're saying. I don't think any Blue Jays fans, much less people who knew the team, really had any faith that they were going to go anywhere. That offense just weirdly never woke up. The starting pitching wasn't there for them. Of course, John Schneider's bizarre decision to pull Jose Barrios in Game 2 yesterday ends up being a very costly maneuver. But I didn't really find it surprising that the Blue Jays lost that series. I think we had them as the favorite per zips in that series, but at the same time, and it also goes to show the advantage sometimes of home field, like Minnesota having that home field advantage, which I think really stood out. And so I got to go with the Rays. A 99-win team during the regular season. They got off to a 27-6 start. They were, for a long time, we were talking about them as the best team in the American League, if not the best team in baseball. I know injuries left them, by the time October rolled around, a shell of themselves. No Jeffrey Springs, no Drew Rasmussen, no Shane McClanahan. No Shane Baz, who never really appeared over the course of the season. No Brandon Lau, not injury related, but no Wander Franco, no Luke Raley in this series, which meant having to play Manuel Margot. This was not the full best possible Rays roster coming into the postseason. But at the same time, that's every team. You got to make do with what you've got. The Rangers came into the series with no Max Scherzer, with a bullpen in complete disarray, with guys coming back from injury semi-recently, like Jonah Heim and Josh Young, where I don't think you could really be sure one way or the other what they were going to contribute. But to me, it beyond the fact that it's a 99-win team, it's the way the Rays went out. Those were arguably the two worst postseason games any team has played so far in this playoffs. Sloppy, just disconnected, terrible at-bats, bad decisions for the most part, I think, on Kevin Cash's part. Particularly when it came, I think, in Game 2 to leaving Zach Eflin in for what felt like an inning or two too long. Never managed to get his high-leverage relievers into a game. I know they lost both games, and it was never particularly close, I think, especially in Game 2, but not using Pete Fairbanks at any point, not using Robert Stevenson. It just didn't look like the Rays that we're accustomed to play crisp baseball, who seem to have all the advantages, who maneuver their way into having all the advantages. They just flat out didn't show up for that series.
Yeah.
And that has to worry you, I think, if you're Tampa, because again, and this is a team that has now lost 7 postseason games in a row, that has scored 2 runs in their last 36 innings of postseason play, that made 5 errors over the course of that series. It does make you wonder, what is the ceiling on this team? Is it possible for this team to find that extra gear? Is Tampa a team that is just perpetually better constructed for the regular season than it is for the postseason? Again, a 7-game split over the course of 3 years is not predictive, doesn't necessarily tell you anything. But I think when you're getting those same results time and time again, an offense that is very easily shut down, even though it can manage a platoon advantage, 90% of the time, a rotation that's very good, but invariably you find these pitchers, and I think Tyler Glasnow perpetually, gets 4 or 5 innings, but it's a complete slog to get through it. And you're so reliant on a bullpen that has already been worked so heavily over the course of the season, particularly given how the Rays tend to slag their arms. Those guys get injured with appalling frequency. It does make you wonder if is this really a team or a franchise that can work in the postseason? Because I think the other part of it too is, and again, granted, the loss of Franco, one of the weirdest, just straight up, that's not something any team can expect or plan for. But at the same time, that lineup, beyond Randy Arozarena and Yandy Diaz, there was no real thump. There are not guys in that lineup you're particularly afraid to face or trying to pitch around. It just does not feel like an optimized roster, particularly for the postseason. So in my mind, to me, it's the Rays. It's the Rays who I think were the biggest disappointment of that wild card round. At the very least, I thought, they would give Texas a full 3 games if possible. And that's to say nothing, too, of the fact that, those 2 games, 20,000 people show up. I understand. It's 3 p.m. on a Tuesday at a stadium that no one can ever get to, but that's flat out terrible. That is flat out terrible. That takes you to a whole different conversation about how, okay, well, they finally got the stadium, but their plan is to build it in the exact same place where they're already having trouble getting people out to the stadium. Like, does having a TGI Fridays go along with the stadium really make any difference in that regard? Like, if you plop the Battery in St. Petersburg, are you getting an extra 15,000 fans out of that? Probably not. So, look, this is a weird point. It's a weird point for this franchise, and I think you could say it's almost an inflection point because, again, this is 3 straight postseasons where the Rays have come in, coming off great regular seasons, have done nothing with it, have looked very bad for the most part. And it does make you wonder. I don't think we're going to get big changes from Tampa because, if anything, Tampa is a very consistent team with the way that they operate, the way they do things, the way they build their roster, the way they develop their players. But it does make you wonder, again, what is the realistic ceiling here? How far can this team actually go if they stick to this particular way of doing things, and if you don't have particularly those bigger name stars, the big, and losing McClanahan certainly didn't help. He would have been the ace in that rotation anyway, but I don't know. It's a tough place for Tampa Bay to be right now, and I think it raises the question of where and how far exactly their whole thing can go, really.
Here's what's going to happen, though. Okay. We're going to forget all about this in 6 months. They are going to be right there at the top of the AL East in May, and we're going to be like, well, I don't know. The Rays can do some stuff. Rays,
for me personally,
they're hanging around. Like Rays are. Mm-hmm.
I will come into the spring being like, it's finally time to give up on the Rays. They're only going to win like 84 games. Then invariably they're going to do what they do, and I'll be like, okay, fine. The Rays are actually good. We're going to get to the postseason and be like, okay, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is when it happens. And then they're going to lose in 2 games again in the wild card round to like Detroit or something. It just starts to feel like they're kind of in a little bit of a cursed loop or something, like a Groundhog's Day type thing. But,
yeah, it's but I don't know. I also just wonder, like, it's kind of amazing to see, because this kind of brings into the Blue Jays, who had another rough showing. The AL East had a terrible week this week, and now you're kind of like, was the AL East just sneaky bad? And we because coming into the year, we were like, oh, the AL East, like the worst AL East team, still going to be a really good team. And just
no, the worst AL East team was a below 500 Red Sox team. Like, right. They were not good. They're just straight up not good.
And the Yankees weren't good. And now you're like, maybe the Blue Jays weren't good. And now we're like, is it just the Orioles? Like, a lot of supremacy is riding on the Orioles having a good showing. And now I'm just kind of like, uh-oh, should we be looking at a positive Orioles series here? Or are they looking at potentially getting bounced in their first playoff series in a really long time? I don't know. Like, do you make any...